everybody. Welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. I'm your host, Matt Connarton. Welcome. Talking really fast because we have a lot to get to today, so I want to make sure we get it all in. So it's going to be a quick, very fast-paced, high-energy show today. Oh, wow, I'm already spent. I think I opened a little too high energy. Now I'm exhausted. Can't win. Anyway. But we do have a lot to get to today. I'm serious about that. So I'm going to try to get to as much as possible. But I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to try to get to because I won't get to all of it. And then, you'll be sitting there going, wow, Matt didn't get to everything. And then I'll say, well, we'll cover the rest of it tomorrow night on the radio edition. And then something will happen between now and then that I'll end up covering. And I have some thoughts on the... I decided last minute not to get into this specifically. I had some thoughts on the Stephen A. Smith and his comments regarding Ray Rice, but we'll might hold off on that. I want to kind of let that percolate in my brain a little more. Before we get started, I do want to say, for anyone who wants to check it out, I had the honor and pleasure of being a guest Monday on a program called Olivia Unzipped. Some of you are no doubt familiar with it. It airs on dkrn.fm every Monday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern. And this past Monday, Olivia had me on. So if you missed it, there is a replay of that tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time at dkrn.fm. Don't forget, by the way, dkrn.fm, you can listen on your mobile device easily and effortlessly. Just go to dkrn.fm/mobile. You don't have to download an app or anything that's going to eat up a bunch of memory. You just go to that domain, click the big play button there, and you're off and running. So, and by the way, if you go to dkrn.fm and click schedule, you can see all the replay times for all the shows. Every show that airs on DKRN goes into a 2-week rotation. So if you miss it when it airs live, including, by the way, the radio version of this show, there are plenty of times when you can catch the replay. But Olivia usually discusses business with her guests, but we actually focused a lot on the kinds of things that I cover on this program and politics and, world events. And we even got into a little bit of conspiracy theory stuff, which was interesting. Neither Olivia nor I are conspiracy theorists, but we kind of agreed that they might be right about some things. Maybe we'll get to that today. Maybe we won't. I make no promises. But anyway, so you can hear Olivia's interview, Olivia interviewing me tonight at 7 on dkrn.fm. Let's dive right into some stuff. So I want to readdress something that I discussed a couple of weeks ago. This won't take long. We're going to hit a few. I'll reveal this much. We'll get into a few small things, and then we'll hit the one big topic for today. I think it was 2 weeks ago on the show. I used a particular term to describe something, and I want to kind of revise and extend my remarks, as they say in Congress, about this, because I used a term that I don't think I should have used. This is not, I want to clarify what I was thinking when I said this. It's not an apology per se, because the people I said this about, they don't know me or care about me or anything. I'm nothing to these people, but here's the thing. I used a word to describe something that these people are engaged in, and it's a word that I tend to criticize others for using a bit too loosely. So, yeah, the show is called Unleashed because I just say what I think with no regard for consequences, typically, and whatnot, but I don't want to be a hypocrite. So the word I used, the big T, no, not testosterone. Although if you're suffering from low T, you should see your doctor, and there's medication. Well, never mind. But the word treason. I use the word treason to describe something. Let's go back and revisit this story very quickly, and then I want to clarify what I'm thinking and feeling about this. So the Washington Post reported back on September 2nd. Former Senators Trent Lott and John Breaux have new gigs as Russian bank lobbyists. Okay, this was, this is from the Washington Post. Two former U.S. Senators, Republican Majority Leader Trent Lott, if you ever wondered what happened to him. And Democrat John Breaux are now working as lobbyists for the Russian-owned Gazprom Bank, according to a Friday filing. That bank, controlled by the Russian state-owned Gazprom energy company, was a target of U.S. sanctions in July. I don't need to read the rest of this to you. You get the idea. And if you're a regular viewer of the show, you already know the story. But basically, to recap the story itself very quickly. So the United States government is currently engaged in economic sanctions against Russia because of Putin's incursion into Ukraine. We're not doing anything militarily there, thank God, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is Russia is still a nuclear power. But we have been doing things economically to hurt them. And apparently some of those efforts have in fact caused some disruption to the Russian economy. Now, this is not unusual for former senators or congressmen or people who have other high-profile jobs in Washington to, when they leave Washington, to then go and be lobbyists. It's kind of a revolving door. A lot of people, myself included, are very critical of this system. I think it was last week on the show I addressed the story about Eric Cantor, former House Majority Leader from Virginia, who went off and became a lobbyist and is now, he went from $100,000 a year salary in Congress approximately to, I think his new salary at his new gig is $3.5 million with something like a $2 million signing bonus or something ridiculous. So this is not unusual, and this is part of why people become career politicians. If you are, and this is one of the reasons why we'll never have term limits, aside from the obviously power doesn't easily limit itself, so people aren't going to vote to limit their own power, so Washington will never institute any kind of term limits legally. But the other thing is, when people go to Washington and they have a job as a senator or whatever, they're able to set up their own golden parachute for when they leave. They just go into a job making millions of dollars. This is not an unusual story. What Eric Cantor has done is not unusual. So anyone who was crying any tears over him, being surprised by his ejection, getting primaried out by a Tea Partier, he's doing just fine. And so are John Breaux and Trent Lott. They are now lobbying for these Russian banks that are getting pummeled by the U.S. sanctions. So they're lobbying on behalf of the banks to have the sanctions lifted that have been put in place by our own government. Now, when I initially introduced this story, I don't think I ever actually said, I think this is treason. I think what I said was something like, hey, the word treason occurs to me, how about you? It was something like that. I don't think I ever actually said that I thought this was treason, but just that word had popped into my head. I don't think it's treason, so I just want to clarify that. That was an emotional response. Now, that doesn't mean I think it's right. That doesn't mean I think it's ethical. That doesn't mean I think it's correct. But I don't think it's treason. They are not... Look, if Breaux and Lott went to work for the Kremlin, if they went over and were working directly for Vladimir Putin against our government, that obviously would rise to the level of treason. What they're doing is they are simply lobbying on behalf of a Russian bank against the sanctions that the U.S. government has put into place. That is not treason. They are, they're representing the interests of this bank and basically pushing for the sanctions to be lifted. No, that doesn't rise to the level of treason. I'm not even entirely sure that it is unethical or immoral. Again, they're not working for the Russian government. They're working for a bank, a Russian-owned bank, representing that bank's interest. I'm not even sure there's an ethical question. However, it does carry a certain, what I call, for lack of a better term, there's a certain ick factor to it. It just feels and sounds kind of icky. Former U.S. senators going and lobbying for a bank whom our own government has leveled sanctions against. It's kind of icky, right? For lack of a better word. So, but I just wanted to clarify that. I don't think it's treasonous. And, like I said, I tend to lecture others about the use of that term, whether it's not that this happens a lot, but it does happen. Whether it's Republicans accusing Obama of treason because he makes a decision they don't like, and the political rhetoric and hyperbole in Washington is so overheated nowadays that people actually use that term. Or even during the Bush administration, when Democrats would say that about Bush and Cheney, accusing them of treason. That is a word that should not be used lightly. That is a word that should not be just thrown around. And so I wanted to address that because I did use that word. That's it for that. Ooh, excuse me. Moving on. A couple other things, quick things that popped up. There's this organization called No Labels, which I'm a fan of, made up of both Republicans and Democrats, and kind of fighting against partisan intractability in Washington. And let me just they've kind of re-entered the fray because now that obviously we have been for some time talking about 2016. But this is an interesting organization. This is from the AP reports. This is from this morning at 10 a.m. Lawmakers and strategists from both parties are gathering to outline a plan to save Social Security, add 25 million jobs, and balance the federal budget. Oh, and the delivery date for the bipartisan outside group's ambitious plans? No Label says October 2015, right as the next presidential campaign starts to rev up. So we're about a year out. The challenge is relevance for No Labels, which is led by a who's who of current and former lawmakers and some of the savviest strategists in both parties. The group began after the 2010 midterm elections, which gave rise to the anti-establishment Tea Party, with a goal of bridging the chasm between Republicans and Democrats. A No Labels-backed Problem Solvers caucus formed on Capitol Hill and attracted close to 100 lawmakers. Their wins so far have been scarce. So, in effect, they advocate for what I advocate for, what a lot of independents advocate for, which is putting aside partisanship in favor of a pragmatic approach to actually, wow, imagine this, solving problems. What an interesting idea. Congressman Peter Welch, a Vermont Democrat and a No Labels supporter, says, quote, "Where there's gridlock, there are no winners. Congress is broken and there's no silver bullet. It's a frustration for members. Red state or blue state, a lot of us would feel much better if we moved forward a bit," unquote. Looking to boost bipartisanship and No Labels' profile, more than 200 local, state, and federal officials were visiting Washington for a summit featuring leaders from across the political spectrum. There's more to this, but we don't need to go through it. I just kind of wanted to, because this is an organization that I like and support, I just kind of wanted to bring that up. I hope to see more from them. We exist in this, a hyper-partisan era where it's difficult for anything to get done in Washington. And there are some, by the way, who would argue that gridlock is a good thing. The little bit of the libertarian side of me does see some value in gridlock because we're so over-legislated in this country. We have laws on top of laws on top of laws, and it's just not necessary. And it makes it very difficult. I'm an entrepreneur and a small business owner, and so from the perspective of someone like me, I tend to hate bureaucracy and too much government, over-regulation. Some things need to be regulated. Not everything needs to be regulated. However, gridlock is not always a good thing. For example, when we need to do something about the border crisis and these children coming over the border and nothing can get done because Obama and the Republicans, even as close as they were to an agreement, still in the end, nobody can budge and compromise. And so Congress goes home and nothing gets accomplished, and both sides continue to blame each other. Again, partisanship has always been a real thing and has had some level of intractability in Washington, but it's really to a point now where, there are things that need to be done and problems that need to be solved. One other quick thing before we get to the big topic. This is from HuffPost. This went up yesterday. Bobby Jindal trusts science except when he doesn't. And Howard Feynman wrote this. Bobby Jindal, of course, the conservative Christian Republican governor of Louisiana. And I'll read this to you in a moment, but whenever I think of Bobby Jindal, this is now forever etched in my brain, and it does kind of color my thinking about him and people of his ideology. Louisiana, I shared this story with you on the air maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. Under the auspices of Bobby Jindal, they are teaching or have been teaching in public schools in Louisiana that the Loch Ness Monster is real. This is something they've actually been teaching in public school in the state of Louisiana. And the reason they're teaching this, apparently, the logic thread, if you want to call it that, is that the Loch Ness Monster is real and is a leftover dinosaur. Thus proving, by the way, I'm not making this up, and this is not from The Onion. I wish it was. It pains me that this story is real. But they're teaching the Loch Ness Monster is real. It's a leftover dinosaur. And its existence as a leftover dinosaur proves that dinosaurs and humans can simultaneously exist on the planet. And therefore, creationism is real. I know it doesn't, aside from it being preposterous, it literally doesn't even make any logical sense. But that's what they're teaching in public school in Louisiana. Yeah. So, anyway, let me read this very short story to you from HuffPost about Bobby Jindal. America needs a leader to bridge the widening gulf between faith and science. And Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, a devout Roman Catholic with Ivy League level science training, thinks he can be that person. As a studious man of immigrant background with the kind of credentials admired by coastal intellectual meritocrats, Brown, Oxford, and McKinsey and Company, the Republican governor, at least on paper, has a chance to appeal to the middle, should he run for president in 2016. And I think he will, by the way. He also has an impressive, I think he'll run. I don't think he'll appeal to the middle. He also has an impressive record as a government bureaucrat and administrator, both in Washington and in Baton Rouge. Yet, given his own deep faith and his roots in the Bible Belt, Jindal's early focus will be on wooing evangelical Christians and others on the cultural right. If he can solve this Rubik's Cube of religious belief and scientific trust, he may not only do the country a favor, he might reach the White House. On Tuesday, Jindal showed his strategy for straddling the politics of the divide, but also the political risks of doing so. During an hour-long Q&A with reporters at a Christian Science Monitor breakfast, a traditional early stop on the presidential campaign circuit. Like the experienced tennis player he is, Jindal repeatedly batted away questions about whether he believes the theory of evolution explains the existence of complex life forms on Earth. Pressed for his person... See, I'm surprised he didn't just pull a Marco Rubio and just say, "I'm not a scientist, man." Remember that? Oh, I wish I don't have my jug of water, so I can't do my Rubio. Damn, I didn't expect to talk about Rubio today. Longtime viewers know that usually... Well, I can do it with my Pepsi Max. All right, pretend this is water. Here, back up. Let's pretend the last few seconds didn't happen. We'll kind of rewind. I'm surprised he didn't pull a Rubio. See, the idea is it doesn't work with, I need water to do it. You all know what I'm referring to, right? Pressed for his personal view, Jindal, who earned a specialized biology degree in an elite pre-med program at Brown University, declined to give one. So he just wouldn't answer the question. He said only that, as a parent, I want my children taught the best science. He didn't say what that science was. Sorry, I know the air quotes is pretentious, but it's in the article. He conceded that human activity has something to do with climate change. Well, that's a big... but declined to agree that there is now widespread scientific consensus on the severity and urgency of the problem. And we have a call. Hi, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. Who's on the line?
Hey, Matt, it's Don. Thank you for doing that again. I love it when you do that. It's awesome.
Oh, thank you, Don. I appreciate the support. I was concerned it didn't work with the Diet Pepsi as well, but you think it was all right?
Fine. The water's a little better, but that worked good.
Yeah, I try to be authentic, but, I had to improvise.
Okay, just wanted to let you know, bud.
I appreciate that, Don. Thank you. Don appreciates my Rubioism. I appreciate it. Because of, I was genuinely concerned. Seriously, what's going on in my head is I'm genuinely concerned that the joke didn't work. But so I really appreciate that, Don. I actually do stress and think about things like that. More so later. See, that's the thing. If Don hadn't called, I'm not even kidding. I would have spent the rest of the day worried that didn't work and I just looked like a fool. I get very... I'm not OCD about a lot of stuff, but if there's one thing I am OCD about, it's about this show. That's one of the few things I actually give a crap about, I guess. Because of what he views as a lack of consensus on the gravity of the environmental threat, Jindal felt free to turn the science argument against the Obama administration. The president, the Environmental Protection Agency, and other agencies are science deniers, he argued, because they impose limits on carbon dioxide and other pollutants from job-creating businesses without really knowing how well those restrictions work. That is interesting and kind of smart. I don't necessarily agree at all with what Jindal is saying there, but it's clever. Because those of us who do believe in climate change and who believe that it is a direct result of man-made polluting, as I do, we will often call these folks who seem to think that we shouldn't do anything about it. We'll refer to them as climate deniers. He's taken that phrase and turned it back on the Obama administration and those of us who feel the way that we do about this issue. Again, I'm not saying I agree with him, but it's clever. He's clever. This is, by the way, I wish I could remember. There was something else he had done. This was a while back, but there was something else Bobby Jindal had done where I remember talking about it on the air saying, that's smart. I don't agree with him, but that's smart. This is a smart guy. Keep an eye on him. He's a clever one. He's a clever one, this Bobby Jindal. It's not a bad argument, regardless of how I feel about it. I got to give him credit. He accused the administration of being on the wrong side of the faith divide in this area. This will get interesting. Quote, "The left loves energy to be expensive and scarce. It's almost a religious approach," unquote. Well, now there's nothing clever about that. That's just partisan. I don't think the left loves energy to be expensive and scarce. I think the left just wants to explore alternative energy further. As do I. I don't consider myself part of the left. I consider myself part of the center. But I do tend to agree with the left on a lot of this. Jindal brought with him to the breakfast a detailed energy plan full of specific, thoughtful, and largely deregulatory proposals. That should give us a clue as to who's donating to his possible prospective 2016 campaign for the presidency, who, if he's, it's pretty easy to figure out, right? If someone is deregulating things, Republican or Democrat, if they're proposing any kind of deregulation, whoever is contributing to their campaigns is who will benefit from that deregulation. Always follow the money. Always. Speaking about, even when it comes to war, which we'll get to. Sorry, I don't mean to jump ahead. Speaking about another international threat, he warned that I think I just had another mini stroke. I apologize. Let's try that sentence again. I get so unleashed, I forget how to talk. Speaking about another international threat, he warned that the Ebola virus was a harbinger. Jindal, a former administrator of medical services at the state and federal levels, said, quote, "It's not the last potential epidemic in Africa," unquote. On many other science and educational issues, the governor also tries to straddle the partisan divide. He favors a human life amendment to define the legal existence of a person at the moment of conception, but he is also a strong advocate for the cheap and wide distribution of contraceptives. Well, if you take that sentence, that is straddling the partisan divide, absolutely. I completely disagree as someone who is pro-choice, and as someone who does not believe that life begins at conception. I think if you want to go down that road of defining when life begins, I think the most logical point is implantation. And quite frankly, I think a lot of the pro-life movement, I think a lot of these folks don't even really fully understand the difference. But I certainly do not want to start amending the Constitution to define when life begins. Absolutely not. So I don't agree with that. But the second part here, that he's a strong advocate for the cheap and wide distribution of contraceptives, I absolutely agree with that. And good for him. He's a devout Roman Catholic, and yet he is pro-contraception. That's fantastic. I've always said, look, I say to my pro-choice friends, my pro-life friends, if you want to be pro-life, fine. But the best way to prevent abortion is to prevent unwanted pregnancy. It really is that simple. So, Christian conservatives who I think on some level are, I almost hate to say it like this, but I think it's true. I think a lot of them are just kind of generally freaked out by sex or people having sex outside of marriage. So I think that's where a lot of their anti-contraceptive attitude comes from. They think that if you make contraception available, if you make it accessible to people, then they're just going to have more sex, which I don't think is true. Just like I don't believe, for example, that keeping marijuana illegal keeps people from smoking pot that want to smoke. It doesn't, If you want to cut down, and by the way, abortion rates, pro-lifers don't like to acknowledge this, but this is a statistical fact. Abortion rates have declined, have been on a steady decline in this country, as has unwanted pregnancy and teen pregnancy. These have all been on a steady decline over decades as contraception has become more and more available and accessible. And if you make that contraception available and accessible to lower income people, then you've got less unwanted pregnancy. You've got fewer people being born into families that cannot economically support them. Contraception being readily available to everybody and just widely distributed makes pragmatic common sense on every possible level. And this genuinely impresses me because what Bobby Jindal says here, if he says that at a Republican debate during the primary season, there are people in the audience who will boo him. He will get the Ron Paul treatment. Ron Paul sometimes during the debates would say things that some Republicans, some conservatives just didn't want to hear, and they would boo him for it. If Bobby Jindal says during a Republican debate, I believe that contraception needs to be more available, we need to make it as accessible as possible, if he says that, there are Christian conservatives who will boo him. I hope he sticks by what he said here. I'm impressed that he said it because that is going to alienate some of his base. Maybe he thinks that the human life amendment part of that sort of inoculates him from the criticism. maybe it does. I don't know. We'll see. He refused to criticize his friend Phil Robertson, the Duck Dynasty guy, who said the other day that a Bible-based monogamous marriage of man and woman is the best way to end diseases like AIDS. That doesn't even make logical sense, but it's whatever. It's the Duck Dynasty guy. After initially supporting the Common Core Amendment to write national education standards, the governor now opposes the project. That's something where I agree with him. I agree with the conservatives on Common Core. Jindal takes the latter stance in the name of greater local control of education, which would presumably allow Louisiana schools to teach his version of acceptable science. Then it gets a little tricky in my mind. On the one hand, I agree with him on Common Core because I do believe we need to get the federal government out of education. And I think that schools should have local control. Unfortunately, as I'm saying that, again, I can't help but ignore that what pops into my head is in Louisiana, they're teaching in public school that the Loch Ness Monster is real and that proves creationism and da-da-da-da-da. And as a man of science, you would think that Bobby Jindal would be horrified by that. But back when I originally, again, that story is a couple years old. At the time, at least, he didn't seem to have a problem with it. So that's a little scary. But Bobby Jindal is emerging as an interesting potential candidate. And I actually now, I'm kind of hoping he runs because, again, I don't think I would ever vote for him. I think he's probably much more conservative than a centrist like me would be comfortable with. But it would just be interesting to see how he navigates these waters if he maintains positions like wide distribution and accessibility for birth control. Because I think that could really bite him in the backside. Again, maybe he thinks the other part of that and being effectively pro-life, maybe he thinks that inoculates him, but it doesn't seem to work for anybody else. It's like if you're a conservative Republican and you're pro-life, you have to be pro-life to the point of objecting to birth control. I mean, the modern Republican Party, I know I've talked about this a lot, just very quickly, and then we'll move on, I promise. But people need to understand the modern Republican Party, the official position that goes into the platform, the national platform. It was in the national platform in 2012, and I'm sure it will be for 2016 as well. If the official position in the platform, and we can have debates over whether the platform matters or not, I say it does. It is their official manifesto of what they believe, in theory, the base. Their official position is life begins at conception. And the problem with that is this. If you honestly believe that life begins at the moment of conception, then the pill, I'm not talking about RU486, the abortion pill. I'm talking about the pill, traditional birth control, the most popular, most relied upon form of birth control for decades now in the United States. The pill, every time you use that, every time a woman uses that during ovulation, she is committing an abortion, according to the logic that life begins at conception. Because what the pill does is it interrupts the process between conception and implantation. Now, conservatives are not in lockstep on this. For example, Newt Gingrich, who I think is brilliant, much too conservative for me. I don't think I would ever vote for him, and I disagree with him on a lot of things. But I think he's very, very smart guy. I would never want to get in any kind of, if I met him, any kind of debate with him because he would, no matter how right I may think I am, he would just crush me with his intellect. I mean, I'm a smart guy, but he's, I think, absolutely brilliant. He argues that life begins at implantation, not conception, and that his own party is wrong on this. So, very, very conservative guy. But Newt Gingrich says no. It makes much more sense to say life begins at implantation, not conception. Because if it begins at conception, the pill, the IUD, all this other stuff, if you use those, you're a baby killer. As far as the Republicans are concerned. I think a lot of people don't understand this. They don't understand that this is what the Republican platform says. So, I didn't realize for years when I would hear Republicans say, well, I think life begins at conception, I didn't realize the ramifications of what that really means. Because if the Republican Party could wave a magic wand and make it so that effective immediately, you could not interrupt the process between conception and implantation, then we'd have to start locking up a whole lot of people for murder. And part of how this has come to light, by the way, and this is the other thing a lot of people don't understand. There's a difference between the morning after pill and the abortion pill. The conservative Christian right has intentionally, I believe, because it's politically very savvy, they've conflated the two. So that a lot of people now think they operate under the understanding that those two things are the same thing. And they're not. RU486, the abortion pill, actually facilitates an abortion. The morning after pill, all that is a extremely high dose, concentrated form, a dose, that's the word I was looking for, a highly concentrated dose of the pill. That's all it is. Because when you become pregnant, you don't become pregnant instantly. It takes a few days. And there are steps in the process. It's not like, bam, you're pregnant. And so if you do anything to prevent pregnancy after intercourse, then, well, I guess as far as Christian conservative Republicans are concerned, you do anything to interrupt that, you're a baby killer. All the morning after pill is a very high dose of birth control. So if you then, as a Christian conservative, argue that the morning after pill is no different than the abortion pill and facilitates an abortion, then that's the same thing as saying that the pill that a woman takes, every day, that is also akin to an abortion. All right, we got really sidetracked there, and I apologize, but that's a big pet peeve. Isn't even the right. It's a big hot button with me. The misinformation about the abortion pill and the morning after pill. They are two different things. Okay. We got about 20 minutes left. Let's get to the big thing. Today, before I left my office, I was watching, I had the news on, and Obama was speaking to CENTCOM, the troops, about our impending further action. I mean, look, we're already effectively at war with ISIS and in Syria. There's all this talk about arming the Syrian rebels, the moderate. We have to arm the moderate Syrian rebels to fight the IS. I think that historically we get into trouble when we involve ourselves in these sectarian conflicts, which are effectively civil wars, because it becomes very tricky to figure out who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, and how do we differentiate them? And then how do we deal with the fact that eventually, because alliances constantly shift, the fact that who we think are the good guys today might be the bad guys tomorrow, and what do we do about weapons that we give to the good guys potentially falling into the hands of the bad guys? And by the way, we've already identified when the IS first started to rise up in Iraq that they had weapons. They have weapons that we gave to the Iraqi army, which have since been seized by the IS, or ISIS, or ISIL. I'm just saying the IS. All three of those terms seem to be being used in the media. So it's very, very complicated. And we have always had this sort of my enemy's enemy is my friend approach to foreign policy in this country. And I think in the long term, it does us a lot of harm, and even, just a couple quick examples, Saddam Hussein at one time was our pal. Or at the very least, we tolerated him because during the Iran-Iraq war, which lasted, a decade plus, around a decade, Iran was our sworn enemy, and Iraq was keeping Iran busy with their war. So we were cool with Saddam. He was kind of, it's like we were fighting a proxy war with the Iranians through Saddam. And then eventually, of course, we all know what happened. Osama bin Laden at one time. It's stunning to think about, but he was our pal at one time. And then that relationship went south. I don't think my enemy's enemy is my friend works in foreign policy, and I'm skeptical about it. And a lot of people are skeptical about it. There's been some really good satire that has emerged in The New Yorker. You can find The New Yorker online if you go to the website. Just a couple things. So basically what we're looking at now is, because we're trying to figure out how to arm the moderate Syrian forces, the moderate Syrian rebels in Syria to fight the IS. So we got to figure out now who are the rebels in Syria, and who are the moderate thinking, not the Islamic fundamentalist extremist Syrian rebels, but who are the moderate Syrian rebels that we can work with, that we can give weapons to go and fight the IS, and just hope that all turns out well for us. There's this popped up after announcing on Thursday that it would seek $500 million to help train and equip appropriately vetted elements of the moderate Syrian armed opposition. The White House today posted the following moderate Syrian rebel application form. So, again, this is satire. This isn't real, just, in case you're one of the slow kids. I just want to be clear about that. But I think this is pretty funny. So this is the application form. If you're a moderate, if you want to see if you qualify as a moderate Syrian rebel, says here, welcome to the United States Moderate Syrian Rebel vetting process. To see if you qualify for $500 million in American weapons, please choose an answer to the following questions. And there is a short application here. So here are the questions. Play along at home if you'd like. Maybe you'd like to answer these yourself if you've got a pencil and a pad of paper handy. Pretend you're a Syrian rebel, of course. A little role-playing. Might spice up the marriage a little bit, if you're someone who's been married a long time. A little role-playing. That's another topic for another show. Okay, here we go. First one. As a Syrian rebel, I think the word or phrase that best describes me is A, moderate, B, very moderate, C, crazy moderate, or D, other. Next question. I became a Syrian rebel because I believe in A, truth, B, justice, C, the American way, or D, creating an Islamic caliphate. I think D would be a disqualifier. I think I know the answer to that one. Next question. If I were given a highly lethal automatic weapon by the United States, I would A, only kill exactly the right people that the United States wanted me to kill. B, try to kill the right people with the caveat that I've never used an automatic weapon before. C, kill people only after submitting them to a rigorous vetting process. Or D, immediately let the weapon fall into the wrong hands. Next question. I have previously received weapons from A, Al-Qaeda, B, the Taliban, C, North Korea, or D, I did not receive weapons from any of them because after they vetted me, I was deemed way too moderate. Next question. I consider ISIS A, an existential threat to Iraq, B, an existential threat to Syria, C, an existential threat to Iraq and Syria, or D, The people who will pick up my American weapon after I drop it and run away. And finally, one more question. Complete the following sentence. American weapons are A, always a good thing to randomly add to any international hotspot. B, exactly what this raging civil war has been missing for the past 3 years. C, best when used moderately. Or D, super easy to resell online. Thank you for completing the Moderate Syrian Rebel application form. We will process your application in the next 1 to 2 business days. Please indicate a current mailing address where you would like your weapons to be sent. If there is no one to sign for them, we will leave them outside the front door. Okay, so that's the application for Moderate Syrian Rebels. And then this other bit of satire, also from the New Yorker, published yesterday. Kerry claims U.S. has found a moderate Syrian rebel. Andy Borowitz writes, in what Secretary of State John Kerry described as a significant foreign policy coup, the U.S. claimed on Tuesday that it had successfully located a moderate Syrian rebel. Though Kerry did not elaborate on how the U.S. did so, he said that locating the rebel was the culmination of a months-long effort. The Secretary of State said that the Syrian had been appropriately vetted and was deemed moderately rebellious. Kerry said, quote, he definitely seems to be the sort of gentleman we can work with, unquote, adding that several millions of dollars would be spent arming and training the rebel in the days and weeks ahead. Kerry said that the government's successful identification of a moderate Syrian rebel was a major victory that should silence critics of the U.S. strategy in Iraq and Syria. Kerry said, quote, to all of the naysayers who have been arguing that there are no moderate Syrian rebels, I am here today to say that we have found one. And if we have found one, that means there must be others out there, unquote. All right, so that's, I think that's pretty funny. But it does highlight a serious point that arming the quote-unquote moderate Syrian rebels might not be a great idea because, again, as I said before, this policy of interjecting ourselves into these sectarian conflicts has a way of backfiring. On a practical level, how do you even identify who the right people are to arm, and how do you ensure that the weapons won't fall into enemy hands, as did with the, again, we gave arms to the Iraqi army with the idea that, okay, we're going to leave now so the Iraqi army can take care of itself, right? They got this. And they dropped their weapons and ran away when they saw the IS coming. Oh, these people mean business. Even Al-Qaeda didn't want them. That's how serious they are. So we don't have a ton of time left, but we've got a little bit. Let's talk about the real reason this is all happening. What do I always say on this show? Whenever something doesn't make sense, follow the money. I also say a lot on this show, and I find myself saying it more and more lately, that I am not a conspiracy theorist. My own personal policy in my approach to conspiracy theorism is that, I don't buy into most of it. For example, I don't believe that 9/11 was really, an inside job and whatnot. I don't buy into most of it, but I don't dismiss it out of hand either. I keep an open mind because maybe some of what they theorize about, maybe they're right. Truth often is stranger than fiction. And there have been instances, for example, Robert McNamara conceded a few years ago that the Gulf of Tonkin incident, some of that was fabricated and sold to the public as an excuse to escalate our involvement in the Vietnam War. That not everything there was in that incident was legit. There was some staging going on there. McNamara actually admitted that. So that's fuel for the fire of the conspiracy theorists. False intelligence used as an excuse to escalate our involvement in conflict. Has that happened more recently as well? I think it might have. So look, again, I don't buy into most of it. I don't believe that there are these actually very small secret societies that actually run everything. I don't believe that, the extreme of conspiracy theorism, which, people who buy into absolutely all of it in its extremist form, go so far as to think that, the world is really run by alien reptilian shapeshifters and all that. No, I don't buy into any of it, but I keep an open mind. I say all that, I offer that disclaimer because there's one particular thing that I think they're definitely right about, where I think conspiracy theorism and reality do kind of bleed together. When they discuss the military-industrial complex. In fact, I would like to take that phrase, military-industrial complex, and I would like to move it. I would like to take that phrase away from the conspiracy theorists and move that into the mainstream way of thinking about world events and our government, because I'm convinced now more than ever that war is about business and it's all about money. I'm not saying that it's always been that way. I'm not saying that the United States has never fought a just war that needed to be fought. I absolutely believe that we have. But at this point, you look at invading Iraq and invading Afghanistan, and, who really attacked us on 9/11? Most of the hijackers were recruited from the Wahhabi tribe in Saudi Arabia. And there is evidence to suggest, apparently, that that there were actually Saudi Arabian government officials who were in contact with some of these hijackers who were from Saudi Arabia. That's where Osama bin Laden recruited these people from. He himself was a Saudi national. But of course, for all kinds of geopolitical reasons, we can't go invading Saudi Arabia, so we invade Iraq, we invade Afghanistan. None of that is conspiracy theory stuff. That is underreported. It's not spoken about enough, but that is information that is in the mainstream media, that is acknowledged and is verified and is true. So why do we do this stuff? Why do we get ourselves into these terrible no-win situations? This arming the Syrian rebel stuff is crazy talk. Why do we do this? Does the IS really pose an existential threat to the United States, as people like Lindsey Graham and John McCain have been talking about, getting us all amped up and ratcheted up and freaked out by this presumed threat? Come on. Really? So why do we do it? Because it's a business. War is a business. The military-industrial complex is a business. It is its own industry, hence the word industrial. They're right about this. That bit of conspiracy theorism, look, that is true. I'm absolutely convinced of that at this point. Follow the money. Whenever anything doesn't make sense, follow the money. There's always a profit motive. Whenever our government or a corporation or whoever, whenever anyone does something that doesn't make any sense and you can't figure out why would they do this, follow the money. You'll always find there's always a profit motive. When all else fails, follow the money. Well, let me read this to you very quickly. This is from thenewamerican.com. Joe Wolverton wrote, "Follow the money, war hawks and the military-industrial complex." This is relatively short. We're almost out of time, but I'll read this quickly. Follow the money. This was the advice given by an informant on how to discover who was behind the Watergate break-in, as portrayed in the 1976 movie All the President's Men. That was Deep Throat who said that, follow the money. The suggestion is still sound, and following the financial connection between pro-war pundits and the defense contractors reveals relationships between the two that have borne deadly offspring. From Obama's promise to degrade and ultimately defeat the IS to the ubiquitous appearance of former generals on cable news shows, all calling for U.S. military response to the alleged threat, the war drums are constantly sounding in the ears of Americans. One example of the promotion from former brass to send in the armed forces to combat ISIL came from retired Marine General Anthony Zinni, who reportedly recommended putting as many as 100,000 boots on the ground in Iraq and using special operations forces or CIA operatives on the ground there to get detailed intelligence. Another suggestion, highlighted by an article in The Nation, is made by retired General Jack Keane, who reportedly recommends offensive airstrikes and the deployment of more military advisors to the region. Generals put out to pasture, longing for the glory days of battle is not newsworthy, though. What is worth noting, however, is the ties these hawks have to the manufacturers of military material. They're talking this way because there's profit motive. Consider as evidence of this unholy alliance the case of Jack Keane. The Nation, in an article posted September 12th entitled, "Who's Paying the Pro-War Pundits?" by Li Fang, provides the following synopsis of his practically unreported alliance between war promoter and war goods producer. Keane has appeared on Fox News at least 9 times in the last 2 months to promote the idea that the best way to stop ISIS is through military action, in particular through airstrikes deep into ISIS-held territory. In one of the only congressional hearings about ISIS over the summer, Keane was there to testify and call for more American military engagement. On Wednesday evening, Keane declared President Obama's speech on defeating ISIS insufficient, arguing that a bolder strategy is necessary. Left unsaid during his media appearances are Keane's other gigs as special advisor to Academy, the contractor formerly known as Blackwater, as a board member of tank and aircraft manufacturer General Dynamics, as venture partner to SPC Partners, an investment firm that partners with defense contractors. On and on. The list goes on. There's more to this article, but we're out of time. The point being, the people who are pushing for war are the people who profit from war. That is why we get ourselves involved in these dumb wars that don't make any logical sense, that kill our brave men and women who we send there under the guise of defending our country, when in reality, they're defending the profits of these people. This is treason. This stuff is treason. These people are responsible for the murder. If you are a member of a military family, if you have someone who has died overseas over this crap, the United States government, these war profiteers murdered your children. That is a fact. These people are all guilty of treason. I'm not a pro-death penalty guy, but people like this guy, these people should be taken out and shot for treason. Little strong maybe, but you know what? I said it and I meant it. That's how I feel about it. That's it. We're out of time. I'll be back Thursday night on DKRN.FM for the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed. That's assuming someone from the government hasn't shown up and taken me away for what I just said. But it makes me angry. So you can catch me tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern, DKRN.FM. Don't forget, you can stream it on your mobile device, DKRN.FM/mobile. And if you're watching live on Wednesday, I'll be back later with the Honorable Gary S. Hopper for Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. And of course, today's show will be up by 10 p.m. this evening on demand at IPMNation.com. That's it for now. Talk at y'all later. Thanks, everybody. We'll be right back.